Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on another session of WeConnect's Academy Learning from Women Leaders Around the World series. My name is Andrea, and today I'm very happy to introduce Jennifer Duignan. She is the Vice President of Global Delivery at Atlas Technology Services. It is a WeBank certified company, part of the WeConnect International Network, and it is based in the United States. Today, we're going to talk about something quite important for both professional and personal life, emotional intelligence, and how it is correlated to business success. Jennifer is a highly experienced professional with proven track record of setting up best-in-class enterprise program management offices. She has experience on large-scale global system implementations and process reengineering initiatives, and has played key leadership roles in project portfolio, strategy, planning, and management. In this webinar, she will be guiding attendees through the components of emotional intelligence and how to use it as a tool retrospectively and proactively. I'll let Jennifer introduce herself, but I would like to remind all of you that you are in listen-only mode. So if you have questions or comments, please make sure to type them down in the chat or Q&A boxes, and I'll make sure to read them out loud at the end of the webinar. This is a one-chance opportunity, so I encourage you to do as many questions as possible. Thank you, Jennifer, for being with us here today. Over to you.
Hi, great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'll first just start with a brief overview of Atlas, and then we'll jump right into the content. Atlas is a firm that specializes in program management, PMOs, and change management across the delivery spectrum, from management consulting to managed services and to workforce solutions. We have global presence in both US and Prague. You just heard my introduction, so thank you again for that. So in spending 20 years of doing this type of work quite a bit, what I learned the most about is not only what worked well, but often what didn't work well. And when I think about those instances where projects or strategies didn't work well, we so often try to fix those things with systems or processes. And very often it's actually because we didn't focus enough on team dynamics and the EQ that is required. So on that note, let's start talking about EQ. We only have 45 minutes today, so I wanted to just briefly cover today's objectives, and then we'll jump into the content. I want to provide an overview of emotional intelligence very briefly, so that after this, you can reflect on what you've learned. I'm going to do this in a way that hopefully immediately after this call, you can find ways to apply some of these new things you'll learn. To aid this goal, I will start with concepts, and then I'll end with day-to-day application. Specifically, I will move from EQ to influencing strategies. Understandably, this is a very abridged version of topics that traditionally could cover 2 or 3 days in a session. So let's get started. So emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions, as well as those around you. It's of ever importance. It's important from day one in your career, and it becomes increasingly important as you try to advance. We're going to talk more about this in detail, but I wanted to first start with a very traditional definition. We all have heard of terms like IQ. IQ is defined as how smart or intelligent you are. In the States, many of us take tests in elementary schools to measure IQ. The thing about IQ, for the most part, is it's a fixed score. You can't easily increase it. The great news about EQ is a skill you can and should continually develop. Now, of course, there are those corner cases where people might be incredibly introverted, and you may not see large shifts, but the very strong majority of the population and of the folks on this call can and should evolve their EQ. There's also very little correlation between IQ and EQ. The thing that is heavily correlated and very supported by data, in fact, Daniel Goleman, who's a leader in this space, found that emotional intelligence contributes to 80 to 90% of the competencies that distinguish outstanding leaders from average leaders. And I personally would add to that, it's the ability to adjust and pivot accordingly, quickly, based on a number of factors, and we'll see that in some of the applications. Now, just to round this out, and to make it absolutely compelling for you to listen during the next 40 minutes, here are some key metrics on the screen. EQ, when combined with experience, is the best predictor of executive success, approximately 40% more successful. Sales teams, when they've been coached in EQ, have seen sales increase by 10 to 20%. Organizations that spend time developing their talent and teaching them about EQ have seen attrition rates cut in half. And lastly, the benefits of EQ extend way past the workplace. These concepts can help us at home as mothers and fathers and friends. Okay, before we jump into more detail, again, much of the objective of this session is for self-reflection. I want you to take 5 minutes to walk through the following. There's going to be 4 slides that come up, 10 questions on each slide. Just grab a piece of scrap paper. Normally when I teach this session, I have to emphasize no one's going to look at your answers. Given that this is a webinar, this is abundantly clear. So please be honest. It's very important for you not to answer what you think is the right answer, but how you would truly, truly rate yourself. You're going to give a score of 0 through 4. If on the sentence you've never done that skill, then you put a 0. If you find yourself always doing that skill, then you put a 4. And you'll just take a total for each slide. So again, 4 slides and a total for each slide. I will help you monitor the time by giving you 90 seconds on each slide. Okay, we're going to begin in the first section of self-awareness, and you'll have 90 seconds to go through this. And again, just care about the total score of those numbers for those 10 questions. You have 30 more seconds for the slide. Okay, that's time. Please take that total score for self-awareness. Now we're going to move into self-regulation. Please begin. You have 30 seconds remaining for self-regulation. Please put your total score for self-regulation, and we're going to move on to the final two areas. Social awareness and empathy. You have 90 seconds. You have 30 seconds remaining. Grab that total score, and we're going to move on to the final section, which is relationship management and motivation. 90 seconds beginning now. Thirty seconds remaining. Perfect. All done. Thank you so much. I promise that's the most work you'll have to do for the remaining part of the call. I'd like you to take those scores and put them on the side. We'll come back to them at the end of the session. Okay. Now let's break EQ down. There are various permutations you may see online, but in my experience, these are the 5 key areas: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, relationship management, and social awareness and empathy. I'm going to go through these slides quickly because on the surface, the concepts are quite intuitive. Now, the mistake here for attendees, and I really want you to listen to this, is to dismiss this as, oh, I don't need to listen anymore because I know all this already. Because if you do that, you're missing the whole point. It's not about knowing something. The question is, the very important question, are your behaviors displaying it? There's a huge difference between knowing the right thing and doing the right thing. The next 5 subsequent slides, I'll push into each one of these 5 areas. The first two are internal, self-awareness and self-regulation. So that's pretty key, because that means that these two areas are completely within your own control. The other three areas involve other parties. Let's begin. Self-awareness, it's your ability to be honest with yourself and understanding what triggers you. When I interview people, which is often in my role, the number one thing I look for is self-awareness. And the thing about self-awareness is it changes. It's about being able to see yourself in other people's eyes. And we see different people every single day. And so it's relative. It changes with every interaction, every person, every year, and so forth. It's about knowing your strengths and weaknesses. So when I think of a personal example of how self-awareness has helped me in my career, when I first graduated university as an analyst, it was super important to know every single detail. That's how people found value in me. But as I advanced in my career and I got promoted and so forth, being overly detailed became less of a strength. I learned that if I can't answer the CEO or the CIO's question in 30 seconds or less, I'm probably not doing the role I need to do. And so that's an example of how my self-awareness throughout my career has to keep adjusting. Self-regulation, again, an internal element that you can control. It's all about taking the pause. It's your ability to control your emotions, to control those knee-jerk reactions. In today's ever-demanding world, being flexible is more important than ever. You simply cannot be flexible if you can't self-regulate. You cannot be flexible if you can't control your emotions. We've all been in meetings, particularly if we're client-facing like myself, where perhaps a project sponsor or a department head may not have been quite as verbally kind as you would have liked in the meeting. You must be flexible. You have to absorb that. You have to self-regulate your reaction and keep your eye on the end goal. So again, self-regulation is about thinking before you act. On each of these slides, I have a quote. Only on this slide will I bring your attention to it, because I really quite like it. It says, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." That's probably one of the more important lessons I've learned in life. So often, saying less is really more, and no reaction is very often the best reaction, especially when you're finding yourself in situations that are escalating. Taking that pause button is very, very useful. Let's move on to motivation. Interestingly, leaders with high IQs are very often motivated by a lot more than just money or status, the things we traditionally think of. High EQ leaders are very often motivated by creating excellence. And of course, excellence is relative to each person. But you need to figure out what motivates each person. For one person, motivation could be access to continued learning. For another person, motivation might be life balance. And it's important from an EQ perspective, in particular as leaders, to not confuse likability and motivation. As a leader, of course, you could be likable and motivate people, but they're not one and the same. I can't tell you how many exit interviews I've done with employees that resigned from companies. And what I hear is, I really liked my boss, but I found myself completely unmotivated. Again, you need to take the time to figure out what each person's motivation structure is and adjust your leadership style accordingly. Next is social awareness and empathy. I'll begin with social awareness. Social awareness is essential for all leaders. More than just being sociable or friendly, these skills involve knowing your audience and tailoring your approach to meet their needs, advancing everyone towards a common goal. And what complicates it is social awareness is very nuanced, right? For example, social awareness needs, they vary quite a bit from communication forms. I might act really differently in a meeting versus how I type on Instant Messenger versus what I email. I'm sure we all have received emails from individuals that would have been delivered so much better had the message been in person or at least over the phone. In those instances, those are areas where people are struggling to self-regulate. They couldn't stop themselves from sending that emotionally charged email. Another way social awareness is very nuanced is it varies substantially from country to country. Even within the same country, each company has their own culture. Speaking from personal experience, working in a banking environment is very different than working in a farmer environment. And so I need to really watch my social awareness cues. Empathy is the second part of this. And I really want to make a distinction here. Sympathy, which is the word we often use, is extremely different than the word empathy. Sympathy means I feel bad for you, but you don't necessarily feel their pain. Empathy is literally putting yourself in their shoes, where you truly and genuinely understand their point of view. In program management, again, where I've spent a lot of my life, we often see this blame game dynamic between the business and technology. There are various versions of this narrative. The business, for example, might say technology is moving too slow or they're not being flexible. Technology might say the business is not articulating their needs or the product owner is being unclear. I've learned over time, more often than not, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But regardless, the empathetic leader in those examples will put themselves in their partner's shoes, understand the constraints he or she are under, and really focus on the end game. And without a doubt, the leaders who are being empathetic and acting that way will deliver those projects quicker and quicker, because the blame game just lengthens the time. Lastly, the fifth of the areas is relationship management. In some ways, it's kind of putting it all together. It's the ability to use your own emotional awareness together with your understanding of the emotions of those around you. There are an endless number of factors that go into relationship management. But an interesting one I just read the other day in a Harvard Business study, research found that the simple act of asking questions is one of the most important aspects of creating a trusted and open relationship. In my experience, again, a very long list here, trust and being viewed as an authentic leader is one of the main areas to kind of get that relationship management. So we reviewed the 5 areas: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social awareness and empathy, and relationship management. I'm going to give you just a second to look at this slide. You see high EQ behaviors and low EQ behaviors. And ask yourself, which of these words describe yourself? The folks who work for you, which words would they use to describe you? Great. Okay, we're going to move forward. You see a few of those words are highlighted in green. And as I said in the start of the session, I want to talk theory and I want to talk a little bit application. Again, because I want you to be able to immediately apply this after your call. So with that in mind, I want to focus on influence and why EQ and influence is more important than ever. Influence is more important than ever because, first of all, technology. We are constantly working with teams where we don't get to see their faces. Literally, right now, my voice is being heard by you all, and I will never have the privilege or benefit of meeting you. And because I can't rely on face-to-face here, I must try to influence you on the importance of EQ through my voice, through my pauses, through my words. Even this slide where I put this silly spinning thing on here to keep you guys focused and hopefully listening to what I'm saying. Another reason influence is becoming more important is companies are becoming more and more demanding. They want you to become more agile, flexible. And as we learned earlier, flexibility is is super correlated to being able to self-regulate. Lastly, influence is more important than ever because the whole world is becoming flatter. That's when I started my career. The executive vice president or managing director or whatever title you want to pick, if they said something, you just did it because they said it. And hierarchy was really important. Positional power meant everything. The world is becoming flatter, and so it's still, of course, very important. But because it's becoming flatter, your ability to influence people in other ways is there for your opportunity, really. So now let's start to understand how this all comes together. We spoke a lot about emotional intelligence. And as you can see from this diagram, that really is the underpinning of success. Few other areas I'm going to walk into in a second is source of power and influencing style. Source of power is what can you draw on when you're speaking to other people. There's three of them. There could be more, but for today there's three of them. Positional, expertise, and relationships. Positional power, I referenced this just a second ago. It's straightforward, right? It's that top-down power. It's the power that comes from the size of your office, your title, etc. Expertise power, this is where experience and real thinking comes together to create expertise. Expert power is based upon a stakeholder's perception that you have a high level of knowledge or some specialized set of skills. And then the last one is relationship power. This is the most common source of power. This is where you have to rely strictly on your relationships to move things forward. Before we move on to the next slide, take a few seconds to reflect. What is your source of power? And it can be more than one. And over time, it certainly can change. The people that you work most often with, what are their sources of power? Most importantly, where does EQ come into play? Of course, that's a trick question. The answer is all of them. I would probably say the most important is on the relationship one, but let's go through each. So we talked about sources of power. The second part of the equation in terms of creating the outcomes you're looking for is influencing style. Lots and lots of things go into influencing style. But if we keep it simple, it's three things: intentions, emotions, and behaviors. Intentions are your objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Emotions, this is where all the EQ comes into play. What are the emotions of the person you're going to be working with? Are they going to be emotionally charged? Are they not going to be interested at all? These are things you need to consider. And then behaviors. Behaviors are what people see and what they feel. They're what you say and do. And when you use the behaviors with the style well and with the right intent, you are most likely to influence the impact that you're trying to achieve. It's when you choose the wrong behaviors that your ability to impact the end goal is lessened. Continuous influencing, there's a few common influencing styles, and we'll go through them briefly here. The first one is rationalizing. You know you do rationalizing if you rely a lot on logic and facts. It's all about affecting change because what you think and what you know, and encouraging others to objectively and review available information and logically think about solutions. From a behavior standpoint, you rely a lot on proposing kind of theories and then on rationale or reasoning to influence the person across from you to agree with your outcomes. Asserting is the second influencing style, and there's really no particular order here. This is the I. People who are big asserters often use the word I. It's all about the person speaking. It's being clear about what they want. You're probably this person if you often insist that your ideas are heard, or if you challenge ideas of others. The behaviors that you see with asserting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, asserting can work really, really well. We just need to make sure it's with the appropriate behaviors. Asserting is evaluating your situation and making really clear what your expectations are. And then if your expectations aren't met, what's going to happen? Negotiating one's pretty straightforward. I'd say more often than not, we probably fall into this one too often. This is where compromises are made and concessions are made. And a lot of times this is completely appropriate. But a lot of times this is where people end because they just get exhausted and you're not necessarily at the best solution. But nonetheless, it's an influencing technique. Attracting. This is one that I think most of us on this call could use probably more often. This is about where you try to bring people to your viewpoint, but not in an assertive way, but in a way that finds a common purpose between you both. Attracting works best when you or the person you're speaking with, you both have a common outcome or common goal, common vision. And then lastly, there's bridging. Bridging is all about the other person. It's about creating a bridge between you and the person you're trying to influence. It's about putting yourself in their other shoes. Again, take a few seconds, ask yourself, when you look at these 5 things, which ones do you do most often? In a perfect world, you would be able to do all of these equally. And so if you're not using one of these, think about it and find opportunities to try it so you can put it in your toolkit. Now let's put this all together. Any one of these permutations can work. Any power source could go with any influencing style. The difficult part, and the really important part, is to figure out what's going to get you to your goal the quickest way and the most effective way possible. And this is where the influencing style and, most importantly, the EQ skills are needed. I think another really important part is to change it up. Too often we kind of always rely on the exact same skills and the same muscles. I personally just found myself doing this the other day. I have a long-term relationship with another coworker, and I noticed we weren't being terribly creative anymore. And so I realized we were just using too much data. We were doing too much rationalizing. And so I switched it up to an attraction style, and it made a big difference. It added a new energy to a very long-standing relationship. And we both became a lot more engaged, and the ideas really began to surface. So the 2 points here is there's lots of permutations, and you need to challenge yourself to not kind of be a one-note wonder. You need to do multiple ones. I'm going to quickly walk through some of the common ones very quickly, just for example purposes, and then we're going to close this out for questions. So this is often a familiar combination, right, where someone is leveraging their positional power in an assertive way. And why does this happen? Well, first of all, it's just like the hierarchy stuff we talked about early, titles matter. It also happens because it's sometimes the fastest way to get to your end goal. It's quick. Another reason is a lot of people in high positional power engage now only through things like town hall and so forth. And so this is the way to do that a lot of times is through assertion. You can't bridge and attract quite as well. And again, assertion is when you move another person towards your objective. It's all about the influencer. So when you think of people who use this, if they use it well, then they're often called dynamic. The people that probably don't do this as well are often called kind of bossy or kind of just feel like getting steamrolled by them. This is another common permutation where someone leverages their expertise. This is kind of the lane I personally like to play in. In terms of rationalizing, I like to rely on my expertise to make strong business cases for why I think a certain approach might be better than another. This model works well when there's a lot of facts to support it. This model also, I have found, works really well if I don't know the person across the table from me too well, or I know them so well that I know they get emotionally charged. By using rationalization, it's a nice way to keep everything calm and keep an objective. The second thing is bridging. Because I'm client-facing, I tend to bridge a lot because I need to understand my client needs and what outcomes they're trying to achieve. Bridging is all about the other person. It's about creating a bridge between you and the person you're trying to influence so that you truly understand their situation. I'm trying to put themselves in my shoes. So often what you would hear me say if I was speaking to my client is, talk me through this. Help me understand. What's driving your thinking on this? What's most important to you? From an EQ perspective, if and when I do this well, the person feels like I value their opinion and that I'm being a good listener. If I'm not doing this well, then they could think of me being as pushy or nosy. And so these are some of the EQ thoughts that are going through my head when I try to bridge. Lastly is the relationship power source. Again, this is probably most likely where people sit on the phone, on the webinar, I should say. You'll find yourself having relationship power source if you're working in a matrix organization. So often we need outcomes from people that don't live in our organization. If you're working in a function like sales, you really need to rely on your relationship power source. Or maybe if you're just graduating school. I don't have time to talk through all the styles here, and I already talked through bridging, and I think the negotiation is straightforward. So let me spend a second on attracting. Attracting is all about working toward that common outcome. In a perfect world, you're both trying to achieve the same outcome, and that's great, because you both can work towards a common goal. A great way to work towards some shared vision. We see this in program management all the time. Picture this, creating a roadmap, etc. But even when you don't have a common outcome, you can still very much use the attracting function to find common ground. So for example, if you can find a similarity or a common ground between backgrounds, maybe the school, maybe where you grew up, your experience, maybe you both have worked in the same company for a long time, your concerns, that's always a great way to go. If you can find similarities of what the other person across the table from you concerns are, that might be a great way to bring your thoughts together in terms of bridging. Okay, now that we've covered EQ, influencing styles, let's pull those survey results back out. We asked you to tally up the scores across the 4 different areas. I'll give you a second just to look at this chart. But if those scores in a particular area were between the areas of 0 and 24, no need for concern. The good news is this can be a great area of growth for you. And again, EQ, you are in control of. You can change this. So this is a place where you want to dedicate some attention. If one of the areas tallies to 25 to 34, then that means you're doing pretty well. You're functioning well. Lastly, if an area totals to 35 or 40, this is an area of strength for you. Keep doing this. But again, as I've always said, it's important to be well-rounded, so keep doing this, but also developing the other areas. Finally, before we go to questions, I want to leave you with these last few actions of what you can do so you can immediately start thinking about your world in terms of EQ and influencing. First of all, taking those survey results, and then getting other data. Go back to your performance evaluations or any type of feedback. Think about some big conversations you had with people, ones that worked well and things that didn't work well. think back now. Is it because perhaps you didn't rely on a power source that you had? Should you have used a different influencing strategy? And then practicing, especially the two areas that you can control, which is the self-regulation and the self-awareness. With that, I think we're ready for questions. Moderators, you can open it up to questions, please. Moderator, we can't hear you if you're speaking. I don't know if you're on mute. I'm not sure. There might be some technical difficulties. But in the meanwhile, on your screen, I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I know how busy everyone is, particularly on a Thursday at 9 a.m. in the U.S. and whatever time zone you're in. I love talking about this stuff. Please feel free to reach out. My contact information is there. As a firm, we specialize here. Feel free to reach out. Any questions and so forth. And I'm sorry the technical difficulties aren't allowing questions on the phone, but if you email them to me, I'm certainly someone from my team or myself can answer them.
No,
Again,
right now,
thank you so much.
sorry, Jen, that I interrupted. I would encourage everybody to type down their questions right now, please. You can go ahead, Jen. Thanks. Can you hear us? Everybody, if you have questions right now is the time to type them down. I have quite some. Jennifer, can you hear me? Hello?
Are there any questions that are coming through?
Yes. You have to type them down. Natalie McGrady, I see that you see that you're muted, but if you can type down your question in the chat box, that way we can read them out loud. Thank you. So yeah, you got a lot of thanks from everybody. And then somebody wanted, I don't know if Lorna, she wants you to elaborate a little bit more on the attract style. If you can continue with that a little bit more detail about that.
On the attract style? Sure.
Yes.
Sounds good. Okay, so attracting it requires a pull energy. It's bringing someone to your objective, as opposed to being like assertive where you're pushing yourself onto someone else. And again, that sounds negative, but it doesn't have to be. Attracting is where you try to find some type of common ground, some type of common objective, something that attracts that person to your goals. Very often, you try to do this in the beginning to get them to kind of want to help you achieve the goal. So, for example, if I take program management again, for example, and maybe I sit from the business and I need to help attract technology towards my goal. I probably would focus on things like on-time delivery and how that would be helpful and meaningful, not only for our stakeholders, but even for ourselves in terms of reputation. So it's about trying to get the person across from you to find out what is common between the pair of you. And that way, that is kind of what bonds you, and that's what gets you towards your outcomes. Is there another question I can answer?
Let me see. Well, just to let you know, everybody, that we have recorded this webinar, and if you maybe join later or you want some more, listen to some of the details with more detail, this webinar is going to be shared. Tomorrow you will receive a follow-up email with the recording. Yes, for those that are the assertive style, how open are they to being influenced by others that have different styles? Or maybe, which styles do they tend to be receptive to most?
So I think I heard the question was, so if your style is not assertive, how often do people assert on you? And I imagine you probably wonder, how can you try to not be asserted upon? It's a really great question, because a lot of times you find yourself in that situation because of positional power, right? And there's a limit to how much you can do. So I didn't cover one of these, but another option, another influencing style, right, is to pause, which is to just walk away, right? So if I find myself in a meeting, right, where I'm being heavily asserted on, and for lots of reasons, there's a lot of people in the room, that person's emotionally charged, I'll end the meeting. I won't end it abruptly, but I'll summarize whatever the open problem is, and I'll take it offline. So that's a way to kind of stop the assertion, and then I'll try to change the environment, because to try to deal with an assertive person, especially if there's an audience involved, is an uphill battle. So instead, I'll pause the meeting, I'll end the meeting, I'll summarize what the issue is, and then either I'll deal with it one-on-one. Now, if it's a positional power issue where the person is just positionally in the organization stronger than I am, then what I would do is then I'd go talk to my manager and I'd explain what would happen, and I would help that person. I rely on escalation at that point to have to do that. And a lot of times that's what you'll have to do if the positional power of the other person is what's driving it. If it's not positional power that's driving it, then hopefully you won't have to escalate, and you can rely through influencing more on a one-to-one basis. And then the other way you could do it is you could, and again, as long as the person isn't only strictly relying on their positional power, you could try to shift the person from an assertive standpoint to more of a rational perspective. So help me understand what data is helping you to support this very assertive point of view. And then, if the data does support it, well, then you probably should be open to whatever they're putting forward. If the data doesn't support it, whatever the assertive point of view is, well, then that gives you a way to try to back into making the person a little bit less assertive and a little bit more open-minded. I hope that answers your question.
I think it did. She replied, awesome answer. Thank you. That's Mary Sue Ray. I encourage everybody to type down your questions right now. Also, if you have more questions, don't hesitate to follow up with Jennifer. Her information is there on this slide presenting right now. And if you have any other questions for us as well, don't hesitate to send us an email. The recording will be available over email. But if you are interested in engaging with Atlas Technology Services or with Jennifer, don't hesitate to reach out. I think you have covered all questions. You got a lot of thank yous. So I'll join these amazing comments on your webinar, Jennifer. It has been really good, really important information. I really hope everybody was able to take advantage of all the information that you have provided here. It was really interactive, and I really hope that everybody is living with being a little bit more smart emotionally. So thank you so much. I don't know if you want to say any final words.
No, I think we're all set. Thank you again to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Jennifer. And if you have any further questions to us as well, the recording will be available tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to Atlas Services. Thank you.
Sure thing.